forceful person in that way. And I think sometimes that's what we need in the church today. You know, we see people giving up their parental rights and they let the world take over for them instead of them taking responsibility for their family and raising up moral and ethical children who know God and who love God and who are involved with society. Parents check out early on. How many of you grew up with the TV as a babysitter, like in the 70s and 80s? How many of you remember that, right? Nowadays it's social media and the internet, but it's the same problem, isn't it? Where parents check out early on and they don't teach their children, and they don't take personal responsibility for that. People check out with their weight. How many of you would love to not have to exercise or diet and just be able to take a pill and have that chiseled physique? How many of you would love that? And how many of you just wish you didn't have to take personal responsibility? Well, some of us don't take personal responsibility for our weight, obviously, okay? Some of you do. Congratulations, that's awesome. But think about it. It's that kind of thought that we need to take responsibility for ourselves. Now, when someone is entrusted to you, yes, you need to take responsibility. No one is going to look at your kid who's overweight and say, yeah, it's the kid's fault. Whose fault is that? Okay, think about it a different way. If you have an obese cat, my dad used to have an obese cat. And no one ever came over to the house and said, you know what, that cat needs to go on a diet. No, they looked at him, what have you been feeding your cat? Stop it. You don't blame the cat, you blame the person. And so if your kids are messed up, well, yes, parents, take responsibility for your families and do what's right. And that's an important step for you, is that you need to do that. But when they get to an age where they're starting to have to think for themselves, what should you be doing? You should be teaching them to be responsible for themselves. Parents, that transition is hard, isn't it? To go from being the one who's helping your kids make their decisions and leading them through life to saying, you're on your own, kid. Figure it out. I've trained you. I've given you the tools. Go. And that's what Paul would do. Paul would train people. He would teach them. He'd give them the tools. And then he let them go. I compare this to the difference between a kangaroo and a bird. Kangaroo, the joey goes in the pouch until he just doesn't fit anymore, right? But a bird, it's like, you're 3 weeks old. Get out of here. You're on your own now. And that's the way Paul was. He's like, hey, okay, I've given you the tools you need to be successful, but it's on you now. Society should be responsible for itself. We don't give that control to the government or to your parents or to your neighbor. And it's easier to say it's not our fault. It's no longer our responsibility to be pure, righteous, or holy. And some people, sadly, even delegate their spirituality to the church and to the pastor as if it's my job to make you more spiritual. As if it's my job to fix you. And I have news flash for you. It is not my job to fix you or to make you more spiritual. It is my job to give you the tools so that you can live for Jesus, to teach you what the Word says, and to empower you to make the right choices and to take personal responsibility over yourself, to make yourself holy, righteous, and true. It is your responsibility to act in the way that God has commanded you and called you to do. And so many times, well, it's not my fault. It's the pastor's fault. He didn't teach me good, or he wasn't there for me enough. That wasn't my job. You don't need a teacher. You have the Holy Spirit inside of you. That just took that argument away. And I want to encourage you to remember this. The Word tells us that people have to be responsible for themselves. And I have a few verses for you about this. And I want you to write them down because they're important. And we're going to start all the way back in Genesis chapter 4, verses 6 through 7. Genesis chapter 4, verses 6 through 7 says, So the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, Will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you. But you should rule over it. So what is God admonishing Cain about? Cain was upset that God didn't receive his sacrifice, and now he's angry. And God says, why are you angry with me? It was your responsibility to bring me the right sacrifice. It was your responsibility to worship me in the right way. And you got rejected not because of me, but because of your lack. So, if you do well, you're going to be accepted. But if you don't do well, if you don't do according to what I've demanded, then what is going to happen? Well, sin lies at the door and its desire is for you. But your job is to rule over it. So you are responsible for your own actions. This is one of God's first interactions with sinners. And what does he say? You are personally responsible for your spiritual walk, your worship, and your being accepted by God. That is a big deal. You are going to be accepted or rejected by God based on your actions. Whether or not you have a personal relationship with Jesus is what gets you into heaven or not. Not based on your parents, the church you go to, society, or anybody else, but you are responsible for yourself. And you must rule over your sin, according to God's very own words to Cain. But then it says in Galatians chapter 6, verses 3 through 5, for if anyone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. For each one shall bear his own load. Now, once again, we see a very clear indication. Who is responsible for you? You are. And rather than criticizing others and criticizing what is going on over here, like these false apostles were criticizing Paul and his style and everything else, what they should have been criticizing were their own hearts and their own actions. And the issue becomes, a lot of times, it is easier to get mad at the government or get mad at your parents or get mad at the pastor or get mad at other people for all the problems in your own life than to deal with and take responsibility for your own life. And what Paul is saying is, look, don't think me a fool just because I'm not acting like these guys. We have to be personally responsible for ourselves. We shall bear our own loads. But Proverbs 9:12 says this, if you are wise for yourself, and if you scoff, you will bear it alone. Yet again, we are responsible for our own wisdom, our own understanding, our own knowledge, our own ability to think clearly and not be deceived. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10, and this is the last one about your personal responsibility in general, and that is, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive the things done in the body according to what he has done, whether good or bad. Now, folks, that is a scary thought. Whether good or bad, you will be judged for everything that you have done. That is a tremendous burden that we should consider. You are responsible if you evangelized or not. You are responsible for yourself if you discipled people or not, or if you raised your kids right or not, or if you helped the sick and the poor, and if you did what was appropriate, and if you served in church, and if you read the word, and if you had a relationship, that is your personal responsibility. And we should not look to others in order to do it for us. Oh, that is so crazy. And nowadays, today, I want you to think about what the world says about those who want to take responsibility for themselves. If you want to take responsibility over your children and maybe teach them at home, or like me and my family, we call it homeschooling, but we have a charter school. So basically, we choose a curriculum, we teach them, and a teacher comes out to follow up with us and make sure that we're on track. Because guess what? How many of you homeschoolers have ever fallen behind in school? Every one of them ever. And so charter schools are really awesome about that. It's that they help you keep on track and they help you not fall behind. Now, those people who want to do that are called what? Crazy. Right? What kind of idiot wouldn't want the government to teach their kids? That's nuts. What's the matter? Are you some kind of psycho that you don't want the government to indoctrinate your children according to what the government thinks is right? What's the matter with you? I'm serious. That's what they think about homeschoolers, right? They're fanatics. They're weirdos. There's something